Parliament, 550 members are scheduled to be appointed to the National Assembly. Each political group is expected to be represented in the Parliament. The 2018 peace agreement dictates that the government runs for 3 years. Elections are scheduled to be held towards the end of the 3 years to bring in a new government. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
The Nigerian Center for Disease Control reports that the ongoing Lassa fever outbreak in the country has now caused 144 deaths in 2020 alone. Ifeoka Tang reports from Jos in northern Nigeria.
The NCDC says that over the last 10 weeks, the country has recorded 855 confirmed cases of Lassa fever. It's claimed 144 lives over that period, with 12 people dying in the last week. Lassa fever outbreaks have become endemic to Nigeria as the disease is now being diagnosed all year round. The outbreak peaks in the dry season, which spans from November and May. The NCDC says that in the last few years, the number of confirmed cases and deaths resulting from the disease have been on the increase. The Director General of the NCDC, Dr. Chikwe Ehekwezu, says 27 states in the country have so far recorded at least one case. 3 states, Edo, Ondo, and Ebonyi, have recorded the highest number of cases. Lassa fever is a disease spread to humans through food and household items contaminated with rodent urine or feces. According to the World Health Organization, 80% of Lassa fever cases are symptomatic, but those with symptoms include headache, high fever, chest pain, heart, and kidney failure. Dr. Hekwesu says the disease has an incubation period of 6 to 21 days and can be transmitted from person to person through contact with bodily fluids and excretion. The NCDC says that in the last 8 months, health workers from major treatment centers have been trained, risk communications had increased, and logistics had been improved to ensure continuous supply for medical and laboratory commodities to contain the spread. He says early supportive care, rehydration, and symptomatic treatments improve survival. Ifeoka Etang, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
We bring you some breaking news now. The 2020 Virgin Money London Marathon, which was scheduled to take place on the 26th of April, has been postponed until the 4th of October. Event director Hugh Brasher says the decision has been taken because the world is in an unprecedented situation, grappling with a global pandemic of COVID-19. He added public health is everyone's priority. Now, this is the second spring season World Marathon Major postponed on Friday after the Boston Marathon, which has been moved to September. We will bring you a more detailed look at how the coronavirus outbreak is affecting sports. That's later in our sports segment. For now, though, let's go to Ramanyang for your latest business news.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in business. Markets continue to fall as more and more countries report new cases of COVID-19. And Zimbabwe moves to undo the controversial land reform program it implemented some 2 decades ago.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor, to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market. It's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in East Africa, where Kenya's securities market was forced to halt trading earlier than usual today after panic selling sent more shares tumbling and the benchmark 20-share index down by more than 5%, tripping circuit breakers that stopped trading for at least 30 minutes. The country reported its first COVID-19 case on Friday. The bourse closed 5% weaker at 2,124 points, and that adds on to Thursday's losses, where the NSE 20 closed over 3% lower. The Nigerian market did recover very slightly on Friday, up by barely 0.2% after a rather poor performance the day before. Nigeria's bourse is trading at levels last seen in early 2016. The Kenyan market, though, was last at these levels in 2003. Recession fears are also weighing on commodities, even the usual safe haven asset of gold. The Saudi-Russia combined assault on U.S. shale producers and the economic costs of the COVID-19 pandemic continued to drag crude futures lower today. Brent crude fell from about $35 a barrel down to $33. WTI crude also opened below $31 a barrel. It struggled to get back above $32. Gold futures had increased as a safe haven asset amid the recent market turbulence, but this week, even on the spot market, they started to fall day by day on the New York Mercantile Exchange to below $1,600 an ounce. Spot gold prices were 3.2% lower, $1,526 at 16:31 GMT. Now, some analysts believe that investors are selling their gold holdings in order to raise cash to make up for their losses on equities. Tanzania's tourism board is also feeling the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in its tourism sector. Because of the outbreak, direct flights from the country's capital, Dar es Salaam, to Guangzhou in China in both directions have been cancelled. Tourism promotion plans have also been put on ice. However, the board is confident that this will be a short-term disruption. Tourism is one of the main sectors that Tanzania depends on for economic growth. It's a leading source of foreign currency earnings and it accounts for roughly 17% of the country's GDP.
Tourism is a major sector in Tanzania. And it is one of the leading sector that brings a lot of income to Tanzania. Right now, tourists are not comfortable to travel out of their countries. Some countries have put restrictions for people to travel out of their countries, and that will affect the global tourism industry. Tanzania being one of the key countries receiving quite a number of tourists from all over the world, definitely we will see numbers drop because of the outbreak.
Authorities in Zimbabwe are moving to undo a controversial land reform program implemented some 2 decades ago. The government has gazetted new legislation under which former landowners may opt for repossession or monetary compensation instead. These regulations apply to both indigenous farmers whose farms were appropriated, as well as those whose land was protected by bilateral treaties. Here's GTN's Farai Mokotoyo with this report from Harare.
Several black farmers who lost their land amidst some of the chaotic fast-track land grabs are to be reinstated on their farms or compensated, as are several white farmers who were protected by international treaties.
And Zimbabwe did sign those BIPAs, the bilateral investment protection agreements with the Netherlands, Germany. There's quite a few countries. And yet, some of those BIPA farms were compulsorily acquired. So the government is now saying that was an error. That land should not have been compulsorily acquired because it was protected by an existing agreement. So that land would have to be compensated for. I don't know whether some of them it may be difficult to actually have the original land back. But certainly compensation will be due.
President Emmerson Mnangagwa's government has said there is no going back on the land reform. It set aside funds to pay former white farmers for improvements they made on the land. The plan to compensate owners of erroneously acquired land is seen as yet another step by the government to rebuild international relations at a time the country is trying to boost its agricultural output. In February, it announced plans to reduce farm sizes so as to free up land for more beneficiaries and improve productivity. The measures are also a response to years of sustained economic challenges that have led to high unemployment.
A country or economy is labor surplus. Farmers will get smaller. It's only when an economy now absorbs that labor into a manufacturing industrial economy that you suck the people out of the rural areas. The farms get bigger, then you don't have to subdivide them, you actually consolidate.
After an initial slump following the land reforms, Zimbabwe's agricultural sector had been on an upward trajectory that's recently been interrupted by 2 consecutive droughts which have slashed harvests, leaving millions food insecure. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Tunisia could take advantage of the crashing oil prices as well. Demand is dropping in part due to the COVID-19 pandemic. On Monday, crude oil futures plummeted by more than 30% at the start of trade in the biggest one-day drop since the 1991 Gulf War. Benchmark Brent crude futures, for example, are now over 48% lower compared to the prices they started with at the start of the year. Experts in Tunisia now see this as an opportunity for the North African state to cut hundreds of millions of dollars from its annual energy import bill.
Analysts at the Finance Commission at Parliament say relevant authorities can secure new contracts for oil supplies. The 2020 state budget was based on the assumption that oil barrel prices would be at $65, but prices have dropped by more than 40% this week.
This measure will benefit the country. The price of a barrel of oil has crashed and will certainly remain low for some time until the end of the coronavirus crisis in the world. Tunisia can seize this opportunity and save hundreds of millions in foreign exchange by making a strategic and cheap reserve.
The country's Premier Lies Farfer said Tunisia could take advantage of the situation. However, he pointed out that market instability could have negative repercussions.
Yes, our economy can benefit from the current oil prices, but the drop could also negatively affect the world growth rate and consequently the Tunisian economy.
Farfer said it's too early to speculate about the economic consequences of the coronavirus outbreak.
We cannot to date assess the impact of the spread of this epidemic on the national economy, since we are also currently in the middle of the situation and the data is not yet accurate.
Fuel subsidies account for 45% of Tunisia's subsidy budget 2020. That represents 14.8% of management expenditure, 8.9% of the overall state budget, and 3.3% of the country's GDP.
Market analysts maintain that following the COVID-19 outbreak, demand for oil has largely plunged as a result of softened industrial output, as well as the huge decline in the airline and travel industry. In fact, thousands of flights have been cancelled globally. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
I'll leave it there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. We'll be delving deeper into the trading that we saw today at the Nairobi Securities Exchange. As I mentioned, a halt in trading. The last one we had of a similar nature was back in 2017. The country did report its first case of COVID-19 earlier on Friday, but what sort of macroeconomic shocks lie ahead? And are we fit for purpose? We'll find out. See you at 1800 GMT. For now, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up in South Africa, appreciating the diversity of culture through art.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Cape Town-based artist Diane Webb is considered a unique South African artist. Her contemporary work is always created in a uniquely African context. The artworks reflect the diversity of culture of all the people of Africa and their stories. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has more.
Diane Webb describes all her art pieces as unique, the reference from photographic images of Southern Africa and her people.
I've been painting all my life, from when I was a little girl. I just love to draw. At the end of the day, drawing is the basis of all art. And the art that you see here are my stories. They're my stories of Africa. They're the stories of Africa right now.
Diane tells me that she's been traveling for the past 35 years, and her body of work reflects her travels.
Each piece of Diane's work is woven together with a variety of mediums, thus expressing the stories of our African continent.
The stories that are here are from all over Africa, from Namibia, Southern Africa. The people that I've met, they are real people that live in the country towns in South Africa. There are places that I've visited. There are sculptures that I've seen. There are little children that are living in Cape Town right now.
Her medium is canvas with charcoal, oil paint and fabrics.
So basically, yeah, and then I loved the way that the glitter worked well with oil paint, with charcoal, starting from the drawing and then really using the glitter or the sequins to bring the life and the color of Africa, the vibrancy. Because if you go to an African market, if you go to any town where we are, the movement, the vibrancy, it's just trying to express the life and the color that is Africa. And really, that's what I've tried to do.
She says the art must provoke with an expressive realism. As an example of her work, here's a Herero woman from Namibia.
The Herero woman, I was in fact looking for the Himba, the beautiful Himba who cover themselves in the butterfat and the red ochre. I went to the far northeast of Namibia, and when I found the Himba, I found a Herero grandmother. She was there in the traditional village with her little grandson lying on her lap. She was selling her trinkets. And it's the most wonderful sight to see when you're in the bush.
Diane has held 2 successful solo exhibitions thus far and says she continuously challenges her own boundaries. Yolisa Njomela for CGTN in Cape Town, South Africa.
After the break, we take a look at the latest from the world of sport. Coming up, South Africa taking measures to protect players from COVID-19 ahead of the 2021 AFCON qualifiers.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In our top story, the 2020 Virgin Money London Marathon, which was scheduled to take place on the 26th of April, has been postponed until the 4th of October. The event director, Hugh Brasher, said the decision had been taken because the world is in an unprecedented situation, grappling with a global pandemic of COVID-19. He added public health is everyone's priority. Now, this is the second spring season World Marathon Majors postponed on Friday after the Boston Marathon had been moved to September. And of course, this highlights just the way in which the sporting world has been heavily affected by the coronavirus outbreak. 7 major sporting events have been either postponed, cancelled or taking place without spectators. CGTN's Laura Walubengo takes a look at how the world of sport has been shaken by the COVID-19 pandemic.